My name is Rowan Lark Whitfield, and it's almost like clockwork. Each summer I know the precise instant when it all starts. It always kicks off when my mother, Irene Hathaway, sends a text to our family group chat. There's a photo of Whispering Pines Retreat attached. The caption never changes. There's always a string of heart emojis, and my sister, Camille Hathaway Pierce, leaves a reply underneath. She writes something like, "Just bought new swimwear for the kids. Everyone's so excited." I find myself looking at the picture for a few moments longer than I should. I can picture that wide wraparound porch, the hammocks facing the sea, and more lounge chairs than anyone would need for a wedding party. Whispering Pines Retreat is so familiar to me. My mother always rents Whispering Pines Retreat for the occasion, every single year. It has 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, a bonus attic room, and a separate space called the Strong Room for guests. Yet, despite all that, somehow every summer, there never seems to be enough space for me, Willa, and Gavin. Camille always brings her husband and the Pierce children, along with Patricia Wynne. They are all included without question. Nobody seems to think twice about this arrangement. My mother always insists the children require their own space, as if Willa and Gavin aren't counted among them. It's like my kids don't belong in the family at all. This time, I didn't wait for the usual phone call, but it arrived anyway. "Rowan, darling," my mother Irene's voice poured from the phone, both affectionate and slightly theatrical. "I just didn't want you to feel left out once everyone starts sharing the pictures." Whispering Pines Retreat was already at capacity by the time it was confirmed that my sister Camille Hathaway Pierce and her husband Samuel's parents, Ray and Marjorie Pierce, would be attending this year. There was no point in disagreeing with her anymore. I simply nod and then tell Willa and Gavin that we have something special planned for this summer. As I gently untangle Willa's hair, I assure her that it's going to be just for us. She beams, believing me. Still, I can already picture the expression she'll wear when the Pierce children return, sun-kissed and clutching seashells, eager to share stories about paddle boards, boogie boards, crab feasts, and scavenger hunts. I feel a deep sorrow when I sit at the holiday table months later and see Gavin's disappointment as everyone forgets he missed out. I once held on to hope that perhaps things would change one year, but I no longer expect that. 13 years ago, I packed up 3 suitcases, a stroller, and an infant who couldn't understand why her father wasn't joining us. I was 6 months pregnant with Gavin. Back then, my husband had found another woman, someone less exhausted and more entertaining. Her identity was irrelevant. What truly mattered was beginning a new chapter. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, squeezed in online real estate classes between late-night bathroom trips and dawn tantrums, and succeeded in earning my license 4 weeks after Gavin arrived. That first property I closed on barely paid my rent, but it was a victory I could call my own. I walked in heels, feeling stretched thin, and knocked on countless doors, hoping one would finally open. At the same time, my sister Camille hosted elegant brunches. Camille and her husband Samuel purchased Magnolia Glen Manor in a gated area, hosted fundraising galas, and sent out Christmas cards worthy of a glossy magazine. Everyone described my sister Camille as absolutely radiant. My mother always said Camille was the golden thread that kept our family united. When I arrived at family meals with spit up on my shirt and my phone buzzing nonstop from client messages, I was just Rowan, always looking a bit weary. I never spoke up, not because I was oblivious to the contrast, but because I wanted to shield Willa and Gavin from noticing it, at least until Willa, who was 6 at the time, sat on the kitchen floor with markers and a paper labeled Lakeside Week Packing List, and asked me whether Grandma loved the Pierce children more. I froze, unable to respond. I explained that my mother, Irene Hathaway, sometimes just has too much on her plate. Yet she insisted, "But we really don't need much space," and told me they'd be fine even making beds out of sleeping bags. I assured her that maybe the following year we'd find a place to ride our own waves ourselves. That weekend, I packed them into the car and took them to Nehalem Bay State Park, where they raced through the mist at the edge of the lake, imagining the water tasted of salt and the sky was endless. Back then, they took my word for it. What I hadn't realized was how often I'd have to convince them in the future. Every meal at my mother's house always came with a serving of unease. On this occasion, the offerings were roast chicken, lemon, asparagus, and barely hidden signals of my place in things. My sister Camille Hathaway Pierce faced me from the other side of the table, twirling her wine glass as if awaiting a performance. "We're considering redoing the Whispering Pines Retreat kitchen next year," I replied in an offhand way. "The rental place feels so outdated these days. Samuel can't even make decent espresso in that kitchen," I said. Irene nodded attentively. "You've always had a discerning eye, Camille. Most people overlook those sorts of things," my mother said. Willa reached for her water glass. I caught a fleeting expression in her gaze. She was mature enough now to recognize implications, even if she couldn't express them. "So, what plans do you and Willa and Gavin have this summer?" my sister Camille asked, putting on a show of curiosity. "We're considering staying local, checking out Nehalem Bay State Park and some community festivals," I replied steadily. Camille managed a forced smile. "That sounds nice. Pretty relaxed. But then I guess if you don't have a steady job, it's simpler to be spontaneous, right?" The conversation stalled, and the room fell silent. Even Gavin lifted his eyes from his potatoes. I remained quiet. I refrained from engaging her. I took another forkful and helped Julian out of his chair. It seemed like the conversation was over as the chair creaked, yet I felt a resolve harden within me. Later that evening, after tucking in Willa and Gavin and folding laundry on the sofa, I pulled out my laptop, not to mindlessly browse or respond to clients. Instead, I started looking up coastside investment properties around Cannon Beach. Listing after listing appeared: motels, fixer-uppers, rundown inns. I had no concrete plan, only the conviction that I was finished trying to fit myself into spaces where I'd never truly belonged. Those words echoed in my mind. Real job. I remembered all the late hours, the pre-dawn showings, the negotiations clinched while Gavin dozed in his car seat. I didn't want to justify myself anymore. I was ready to create something they could no longer dismiss, and I wanted to prove I could achieve it without their approval. The listing's initial impression underwhelmed me. Blurry pictures, an old-fashioned sign reading Cypress Waters Inn, and a price that seemed excessive for a place with carpeting older than I was. However, its location, just 12 minutes from Whispering Pines Retreat, which my mother rented annually, was ideal. It was close enough for me to enjoy the same sunsets, yet distant enough that I wouldn't be reliant on their invitations. I added the property to my saved listings. Afterwards, I started a new spreadsheet. My days were still filled with showings, closings, and picking up my kids from school. But late at night, once Willa and Gavin had gone to bed, I stayed awake crunching numbers. I set up sections for renovations, predicted rental income, and local licensing needs. I dug into zoning regulations online. I studied YouTube tutorials about running a boutique inn. Dreams I had suppressed for years began to resurface in my mind. I kept all of this to myself. I didn't share anything with my colleagues, my friends, or even Willa, who noticed I was staying up later than usual and drinking more coffee. One night, I sketched a draft for a 2-bedroom suite, imagining a bunk room for children, with built-in shelves packed with novels and board games, and a wide window looking out over the ocean. I wrote, "The Strong Room, Willa and Gavin," marking the heading with a bright yellow highlight. Simply having their names displayed like that made me feel like I was creating something beyond just a business. I felt I was making something real, a testament that we truly belonged here. I reached out to Martin Reyes, a former client who now ran a construction company. I asked Martin Reyes for a preliminary quote, and then got in touch with Catherine Ung, a lender I trusted. With caution and discretion, I began to connect all the necessary components. Occasionally, doubt crept in, typically after midnight, while I stared at the forecasts and uncertainty charts. Yet the longing for all those summers gone by was stronger than any anxiety I felt. Before the month ended, I pulled together a complete proposal. There was no applause. Nobody voiced any pride in what I'd done. But when I studied that proposal, with Willa and Gavin Whitfield's names at its core, I saw something that nobody could take from us. I went to see the property on a bleak Saturday in March. I mentioned to my children that we were off to check out something special, though I didn't give any more details. The parking area was pitted with cracks, the paint clung only at the edges, and the sign out front leaned to one side. Gavin wrinkled his nose. "It smells old," he remarked, "like Grandma's attic." I grinned. What matters isn't what it is now, but what it has the potential to become. When I stepped inside, the air felt chilly and musty. The furnishings seemed as if they had been collected from rummage sales 20 years ago. A broad expanse of lonely shoreline appeared, waves pounding in even pulses, beyond the deck doors once I opened them. The silent horizon seemed welcoming, refusing to judge or turn anyone away. Willa remained quietly at my side. "We get to visit this place," I affirmed with a nod. "But it's more than just visiting. We have an opportunity to claim it as our own." As they explored the corridors with curiosity, they noticed everything as if for the first time. Gavin declared that one of the rooms should follow an ocean motif, complete with murals of whales and jellyfish. Willa requested strands of fairy lights and a cozy spot for reading tucked into the corner of the strong room. They debated various features for the pool, whether a water slide or a waterfall would be better, but everyone agreed there absolutely had to be an ice cream bar inside Tide Table Kitchen. I jotted down every suggestion. Each idea ended up hastily written into the battered pages of my old planner. We finished our tour by sitting on the bare floor of what would soon be known as the strong room. No furniture had been brought in yet, and the space was nothing but bare walls and scattered dust. Yet Willa rested her head on my shoulder and softly said, "I think it already feels like home." That evening, when we returned to Birch Lane Bungalow, my children sketched out scenes of how Harborway Haven might appear. Gavin's drawing showed tall palm trees and a placard that read, "Kid Zone, no grown-ups allowed." Willa's depicted a winding driveway with fireworks bursting over the rooftop deck. Their artwork was placed on the fridge right next to the save-the-date magnet for Grandma's summer coast gathering. I picked out sturdy ivory cardstock featuring a watercolor depiction of the lakeshore, then arranged for nearly 30 envelopes to be addressed by hand. Within the invitation was printed, "You are warmly invited to a family weekend at Harborway Haven, a destination designed for connection, laughter, and new traditions." I made sure to sign each invitation myself and included specific details about lodging arrangements, planned events, and a gentle reminder that every cost would be taken care of. All I asked was for everyone to bring their stories and a pair of beloved sandals. I mailed nearly 30 envelopes to cousins, aunts, uncles, and even relatives I hadn't seen in ages because Whispering Pines Retreat had never had enough room. One went to Uncle Malcolm Whitfield, who had gradually slipped away following my parents' separation. I also sent an invitation to Cousin Riley Wyndham, who once confided in me that he'd stopped attending family gatherings because things always felt a bit too rigid. I didn't send one to my mother or to my sister. My decision wasn't out of resentment, but rather out of a sense of certainty. Willa, my daughter, figured it out as she helped me organize RSVP responses at the kitchen table. "Aren't we inviting Grandma and Aunt Camille?" she asked. I hesitated, then deliberately folded one envelope. "Not this time," I replied. and she blinked. But they always join the summer coast gatherings. They do, I said softly. And they'll have their own this summer too. But this one is meant to be different. It's for those who haven't had an opportunity to join us before. Willa dropped her gaze to the guest list, her fingers circling one of the names. Is Cousin Maribel Whitfield coming? She asked. I nodded. She already accepted. Gavin, who had been stacking RSVP cards into a tower, looked up. Are we going to show everyone the secret way to the tide pools? We can show them everything, I answered, smiling. A week later, my inbox overflowed with responses. Affirmative replies bubbled with happiness, astonishment, and even gratitude. One cousin wrote, I can't believe you did this. Thank you for thinking of us. I printed that message and taped it up next to the fridge. Beside it, I added Gavin's most recent artwork, a map of Harborway Haven, with a bold red X marking the strong room and labeling it for family use only. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening just after I'd wrapped up reviewing color samples for the pool deck chairs. Willa and Gavin were upstairs bickering about whose turn it was to pick a movie. My screen lit up with my sister's name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. In the end, I picked up. Rowan, she snapped, skipping any formalities. Is it true? I didn't ask her what she was talking about. I simply waited. This event, this little Harborway Haven thing you're planning, you're bringing everyone but your own mother and your sister. Are you actually serious? I said nothing. Charlotte heard from Zoe Dalton. Apparently they were all planning to stay at this fancy place I bought, and I had never even... Why don't you just admit you're breaking up the family? Camille demanded. I exhaled and consciously steadied my tone. The truth is, we've all been separated for quite a while, I replied. You just never saw it, I added. My mother's retort was quick and sharp. That's not fair. If you wanted to come to Whispering Pines retreat, you could have tried harder, she argued. You always gave the impression you weren't interested in being a part of things. A soft, almost incredulous laugh escaped me. My behavior showed I was simply exhausted from pleading, I answered. There was a silent moment, heavy with unspoken feelings. For the last 15 years, I began, you and my mother would head out on beach getaways and tell me there wasn't any space for us. But there was always enough room for you, the Pierce children, and even her part-time nanny, I continued. Somehow, there was never space for Willa and Gavin. Her reply trembled, her voice breaking. It wasn't about you. It was absolutely about me, I said firmly. And now that I've created something for myself, now you want to discuss whether I'm included? She blew out an angry breath, and her tone shifted, the anger softening just a little. No, I responded softly. I'm finally putting us first. That's something else. She gave no answer, only her quiet, stunned breathing in my ear. I said, I hope the Pierce children have a wonderful summer. We certainly will. I hung up before she could respond and sat beneath the gentle kitchen light, listening as Willa and Gavin's laughter floated down from upstairs. The first visitors started showing up late Friday afternoon, their vehicles rolling into the newly paved lot, faces lit with anticipation and tentative smiles. I took my place near the entrance, handing out name badges and glasses of iced tea, watching as arms stretched wide for hugs, long postponed and cousins, after years of messages from afar, connected all over again. By dinner time, Tide Table Kitchen was alive with shared memories, old jokes picked up exactly where they'd been left, and laughter bouncing against the walls I had helped choose. Gavin Whitfield proudly gave everyone a tour, showing off the dolphin-watching deck and the snack bar menu, both of which he had helped to name. Everyone started calling him the Little Manager, and he embraced the nickname with genuine pride. Willa, who was always the more reserved one, took her cousin Sienna by the hand and brought her to the strong room. Mom created this space for us, she murmured, her voice soft. But I knew she meant not just me and Gavin, but all of us. From the far end of the hallway, I stood quietly and watched their interaction. I remembered other times when my mother had avoided places like this, spaces filled with a sense of welcome she hadn't been offered. Now she was the one inviting others in. Later that evening, we gathered around a bonfire down on Cannon Beach. Uncle Everett played his guitar for us. At one point, someone started handing around marshmallows, and Gavin ended up dozing off in a nest of towels next to where I was sitting. Willa leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "They truly feel at home here," my mother murmured softly. "They adore it," I replied, gently kissing her on the forehead. The following morning, as I walked past the reception desk, I noticed a thank you card slipped into the guest register. Inside it said, "This is how family was always meant to feel." There was no name, only a small flower sketched in the corner. I decided to leave the note where it was. On Sunday, after the last visitors loaded their cars and assured us they'd be back next year, I lingered on the deck, coffee in hand and sunlight on my cheeks. Just inside, Willa was helping change the sheets in the strong room. At the same time, Gavin was brushing sand off the front stairs, and as soon as I spotted Irene Hathaway's well-kept, spotless silver car, too immaculate for these sandy lanes, I sensed she hadn't come to check out the garden beds. My mother emerged slowly, clutching her purse tightly to her side, almost as if it were a shield. She didn't appear upset. Instead, she seemed adrift. "Rowan," she said, her tone more fragile than it usually was. I couldn't figure out where the entrance was. I approached her, not bothering with a greeting smile. "It's marked." She surveyed the main structure, freshly painted, with lush ferns hanging from the porch railing. "You actually did all of this?" "I did." She paused. "It's more than I anticipated." I gave a silent nod, gesturing for her to come inside. Together we wandered through the lobby, the strong room, and then took the path down to the shore. She remained mostly quiet, simply studying the framed photographs on the walls, the labeled hooks for keys behind the reception desk, and the children's artwork hanging by the main entrance. Once we reached the end of the boardwalk, she turned to face me. "This must have required everything you had." "It required plenty," I replied. I wrapped my sweater even closer around myself. "I didn't know you were this devoted to creating something lasting." "You never asked." A silence fell between us. Not unfriendly, just deliberate. "I heard from my sister," I said. "She told me that she's still feeling hurt. She believes I am trying to split up the family." I held her gaze. "I'm not splitting anyone apart. I'm building a new experience for Willa and Gavin, and for myself." She turned her attention to the waves. "Would it be all right if I stopped by with the Pierce children next week for just an afternoon visit?" I weighed the request. For the Pierce children, I eventually agreed. Yes. But not in a special role. Not this time. She acknowledged it with a single nod, and I caught a glimpse of warmth in her expression. I walked with her back to her car, and when she drove away, Gavin came dashing barefoot along the boardwalk, completely out of breath. "Mom," Willa says, "we need you to help pick out the new porch cushions." Charlotte Pierce, Camille's eldest, emailed me to ask if she could work at Harborway Haven next summer. She said it would just be for a few weeks. She wanted to earn her own spending money. I responded, "Absolutely." She meticulously folded the towels, restocked the snack supplies, and carefully wiped down the pool chairs with a level of attention that surprised me. When my mother headed out, she gave me a warm hug and told me, "This place has a new energy. Something good." After that, Irene Hathaway started dropping by every few weeks whenever she made her own trips to the coast. Once my mother came with a batch of cookies. Another visit, She simply sat in silence on the porch, never giving advice or voicing opinions. It was the first time my mother entered a place I had created without feeling the need to change anything. I found myself savoring more mornings holding my coffee and spending more evenings watching Gavin dart after sand crabs, while Willa lounged with her toes in the sun-warmed sand. The business reached steady ground, and my staff became comfortable and reliable. For a change, I didn't feel like I was bracing for disaster. The strong room quickly became the most popular suite, consistently booked and always lively. Privately, we began calling it the strong room, not because it was the largest or most luxurious, but because it contained all the things they claimed we lacked. The message arrived in early July. Camille Hathaway Pierce explained that their regular vacation rental was unavailable, and her children were eager to discover what made our place so special. She wondered if I might have an opening, even if it was only for a couple of nights. I went over her message twice before writing back. Hi Camille, I appreciate you getting in touch. Every room at Harborway Haven, including the strong room, is booked solid this summer. Please have a wonderful lakeside week. No resentment and no theatrics, only honesty. I printed out that email, folded it carefully, and tucked it behind the sign's glass at the front desk. That sign, which Willa helped me create last winter. It said, "For anyone who ever heard, no vacancy, this place belongs to you now." Not long after, as I topped off the bowl of candy in the lobby, a young girl pulled on her mother's hand and pointed toward it. "Is that supposed to be me?" I asked. My mother, Irene, gave me a warm smile. "Yes, sweetheart, that's meant for you."